Very good. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. We would like to get started, and I'd like to get started with asking a few rhetorical questions. So, how many people here have built an engineering team? Yes. How many people have built an engineering team from scratch? How many people have been successful with that team? Consider yourself to be successful. How many people were maybe not so successful? Yeah, so how many people feel like they made mistakes? A lot of hands. And how many people felt like they made some bad hires? Yeah, again, good show of hands here. So yeah, doing this is hard, right? Building a team is actually tough to do. It's kind of an underrated thing within the environment of a business. So we would like to help you remove some of the risk from building a team, from hiring, from developing those team members to delivering for your business, because it's a hard thing to do, right? It's actually a difficult thing to do. And so it's so hard, in fact, that when we think about it, if you look at the numbers, from a startup perspective, 90% of all startups are going to fail. Ouch. That's a big number. That's a scary number, right? That's a lot. 90% are going to fail. So when we think about why they're going to fail, maybe, Jonathan, any ideas on why so many of these startups fail?
No, so still looking at the data, 25% of startup fails because of people or technology. And when you think about it, people build technology. So people matter. 25% of startup will fail because of it. It's a high-stake game, and you need all the advantage you can get.
Yeah, it's a high-stake game for sure, and it's a game that you want to win, right? So what we're here, Jonathan and I are here to do, is to help you walk through some of these things and some of the scenarios that we've used in our past and at Amazon on how to build a great engineering team. We would like to cover much more material than we can, so we kind of tried to boil it down as much as we could for you. But let's get started. Just to get things going, introductions. My name is Brian Kuhn. I have a 25-year background in life sciences primarily, also as an engineer. I've programmed in pretty much any language I can think of to the point where I just couldn't learn anymore. I was kind of done. I moved to Amazon in 2017. I was the very first healthcare and life science SA leader, solution architect leader at Amazon ever. And my role now is I'm what we call an area leader for solution architecture, which means I lead teams for healthcare, life sciences, a couple different teams for machine learning, as well as 3 other teams that are kind of a mix of all of those things. And my role with those teams is to help our customers, particularly startup customers, use AWS to be successful with their businesses. In my time at Amazon, I've done 450 interviews plus. I've been a bar raiser at Amazon for over 3.5 years, so most of those interviews are bar-raising interviews, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So that's me. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Salama, my co-crime.
Jonathan Salama. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Transfix. I have a little bit of a peculiar background where I moved around a lot. I'm from France, born and raised, moved to the US for college. After that, coming from France, I'm going to work at a big company. I moved to Seattle, started working at Microsoft, and realized that's just not for me. I'm much more comfortable at startups and in smaller companies, and I want to see the impact that my customers are having. So I moved to New York, where I joined a small company at the time called Guilt. We're one of the first main e-commerce company in at least the Northeast. I started as engineer 7 or 8. By the time I left 4 years later, they were about over 200 plus engineer. So I got the chance to see firsthand high scale growth of a team within the space of 3 years, and that's just very fast. From there, I moved to California, where I was part of a smaller company. I was the only engineer with the CTO, and a year later, a company got acquired by Lyft. When that happened, I decided to move to New York. I met my co-founder, and we founded Transfix. We're an intelligent freight platform. We build product based on AWS to disrupt the trucking industry. That's who we are.
Cool.
So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about 4 main topics: hiring, how to hire, who you should be targeting, how to find these talents. Culture, that really is going to be the base of everything we talk about. It is extremely important and matter across all 4 things we're going to talk about. Performance, once you've hired these people, how to understand whether or not they're performing, how to get them to the next level. And finally, after you've done all this work around hiring and culture and performance, you need to retain these people. You need to think about how you're going to keep them around, because if they leave after joining your company for 2 months, it is going to hurt. I speak from experience.
Yeah.
So Brian, are we ready to get hiring?
Maybe, right? So that is the question for us here to answer. So if you're going to be hiring people, what are you going to hire them to do? So what are they going to build? What technologies are they going to be using to do that? Surprisingly, in my experience talking with lots of startups and actually doing it myself, it's interesting how few companies actually know what they're going to build exactly, right? They have funding, they've received this kind of ideas, gotten money, and they're going to go build this thing. But there's details that matter here. So what kind of language are you going to use? Are you going to hire for? What kind of technology are you going to use and build your platform on for these things? And so there's a lot of questions around here that you really probably should think about before you start hiring rather than bringing somebody in. I, for example, with my background, if I was going to hire somebody in to do work on medical devices, I would want to hire somebody who has that background. Otherwise, I could get myself some real trouble doing that. So that's something really important to think about. At Amazon, we have a process that we call working backwards from the customer. So this helps us figure these things out, and it helps us figure these things out for our customers as well. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to sit down with our customers, we're going to have the conversations with them, and we're going to listen to what they have to say. We're going to understand their needs, what motivates them, what are the milestones that they have to hit, what are the deliverables that they have to put out there to be successful. And we're going to think about how we're going to invent those things with them. The invention part's pretty important, right? Innovation's very important. If you're not innovating and inventing, then is there really anything novel about what you're doing? So we try to help our customers think through these things. We're going to refine those conversations, and then we're going to test and iterate. And so we're going to do all of this as part of this process we call working backwards. There is a book on it. I don't have it with me, but this is actually a thing. You can go buy a book on how to do it. This is an example also of something that's going to kind of be a theme throughout the talk here, which is called a mechanism. So an Amazon mechanism is basically you take a set of inputs from a business process that's considered a virtuous cycle, and you basically iterate on that process and you inspect it. And then it produces some sort of output. So something that you're focused on from a business perspective that will help you. So if we now think, okay, well, we have these mechanisms at Amazon. Well, I have this working backwards from a customer thing. What's the mechanism for that? And it's actually something that we have that's called a press release, a PRFAQ. So this is the output from a working backwards session with a customer. You're going to sit down with them, you're going to have a conversation, you're going to talk about what it is they're building, and you're going to document this. And the PRFAQ is a forward-looking delivery. So it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years out in the future. What is your vision? What are you going to announce in the press? What are you going to say 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road that you've built? That's what this press release should be. So it's a stake in the sand, something for you to work backwards off of. It also has the frequently asked questions, which would be then, what are the risks? People are going to ask questions. What are the risks? What, is this not going to work? All these things like that. So you're going to put that in there as well so we can answer some of those questions. And then there might be some visuals, some architecture diagrams, things like that. So all of these things, when you look at it from a PRFAQ mechanism perspective, are things that can help you figure out who you're going to hire, what you're going to build, what you're going to go do. So these are some of the things that we use at Amazon. So I'm kind of curious, though, from Jonathan's perspective at Transfix, a little bit about how you did that.
We didn't have that problem of not knowing what we were building. We had the problem of we didn't have customer to ask what do they want to build. But we knew what we wanted. I was lucky enough that my co-founder came from the industry, and we had a clear picture of what we needed. What we lacked of is more like who we're going to target. Who is going to be that first person that we hire? And what we looked at our skill set and what we need to do. We knew we needed to sell. He had that. We knew we needed to build a really awesome product. And I myself, I'm more of a back-end engineer. I can't write CSS to save my life. So I knew we needed a front-end engineer to come help us out, or at least somebody who was full stack enough that they could do that. So that's sort of how we thought about it. We thought about how do we hire for the complementary skills that we need.
Absolutely. Super cool. So if we were to kind of summarize just this kind of before you start hiring section, right? So before you start hiring, think about a mechanism. Think about something that you can put in place to help you think about what you're building and help you define what to build to minimize the risk of making a bad hire, right, or hiring the wrong people. Working backwards from the customer is a way to do that. Now, the process I described, the PRFAQ, is actually pretty heavy, right? So there's a lot of kind of stuff that goes around it. Take what you want. Take what makes sense for you at the stage of business that you're at to figure out what you should do to answer those questions, who you should be hiring. And then day one. So this is something we haven't talked about too much yet, but maybe some of you have heard about the day one, day two culture thing. So when you're hiring, thinking about hiring for where you're at today and where you need to go, as opposed to hiring for where you have been that got you here, right? Think about where you need to go for these things. Focus on culture. Focus on things that are going to help your business downstream. Think about the processes that you're going to have to put in place, the skill sets you're going to need. That's going to help you hire. So now we've got this in place. We've talked about kind of some of the thought process before you start hiring. So let's actually start thinking about hiring. But before we do, there's something that's actually really important that we haven't talked about yet when it comes to hiring. In fact, hiring, performance, retention, all of the things that we're going to talk about here today. So Jonathan?
Diversity and inclusion is something, as Brian mentioned, we'll talk about through the talk. We'll put it in numbers, because I think that's what speaks to everybody here, on how important that is and how it impacts every single topic we're going to talk about. In this case, 86% of women and 74% of men are more likely to join your company if they see that you care about diversity and inclusion. When you get started, you'll realize that like people aren't going to jump in to want to start and take the risk with you to be at your startup. You're going to have to convince them, and so you need all the props you can get. So definitely think about it early.
Awesome.
So I want to talk a little bit about how we made our very first hire at Transfix, because it can be daunting. How are you going to find that person? We don't have enough funding to go hire a firm or hire a recruiter. So first I mentioned we were thoughtful about who we were going to hire, and then we realized that we were going to have to sell our ID. We were going to pitch our candidate the same way we pitch our first customers. It was crucial because otherwise why would they take the risk if they don't fundamentally believe that they're going to have an impact and that your company matters. We then really explored our network. Look at people around the room, at conventions, or people you worked with in the past. I myself was lucky enough to call enough people that I worked with in the past that I finally convinced one engineer I work with for many, many years to join us. And she trusted me enough to quit her job and join us. Now, trust matters a lot with that first employee. You're not going to be able to micromanage them. You're not going to sit next to them and make every decisions for them. They're going to have to make decisions, and you're going to have to be okay with that. So finding somebody from your network, or that's a friend's friend, or anybody that has a connection will matter. Whether you're starting a new company or it's a new team, having that trust matters. For us, I knew Melanie so well. I knew she was going to make a decision, and I knew, most importantly, that if it was a decision that she wasn't comfortable making, she would come to me, and that made a huge difference.
Yeah, trust is very important. So let's think about a little bit of a challenge here, right? So with the way that you're doing things, I'm going to ask you, Jonathan. So if you've got these three candidates, right? Candidate number one, early career, more junior, more curious, just kind of learning things. Candidate two, probably a little more senior, independent, able to work on their own, is starting to kind of be more focused on the customer and customer driven. And then you've got candidate three, who's probably the very senior person, very skilled, very talented, high business acumen, high ego, and they have that rock star quality to them. Now, from a high ego perspective, this can be wonderful, right? If you have somebody who's got a high ego because they're confident, great, that could be fantastic. If they have a high ego because they're arrogant, that can be a problem. How do you tell the difference, right? How do you make sure that you hire the right person? So going through these candidates, who would you pick, Jonathan?
I'm going to be honest. My past self, my younger, more naive self, was going with candidate number three multiple times. And I regretted it every single time. Will not do it anymore. Now I would go all day, every day for candidate number two. And really for one specific point on this, the customer driven. If whether it's in the early stage or now, it actually doesn't matter. If somebody is customer driven and want to have an impact, they need to have their technical skills, but that can be learned, that can be taught. Having that passion to have an impact is critically important in my opinion. So I would go with candidate number 2. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, candidate 2 is probably a good choice, but it also, I think, depends a little bit on the stage of your company, right? So you may be at a stage where you're so early that you actually can't afford candidate 2, right? You might need to find a friend or somebody that you know that is the candidate 1 that can help you get things going to work your way up to candidate 2. Maybe you're at a place where it actually makes sense. Maybe you'd want to take that risk. I've also been burned by it. I probably wouldn't do it. I would not do it again. But everyone gets to make their own choices here. So all things considered, I want candidate 2, but it also just depends a little bit. So when you think about Transfix and these are the candidates that you have coming into your pipelines for hiring, right? So what's the process that you have for kind of interviewing and thinking about how you're going to evaluate these people?
Yeah, so we'll talk first about what we did before and then what we're doing now. Obviously, it's very different. We're 8 years old and have about 300 to 400 people, so it's a bit different. But first, as mentioned, use your network, make phone calls. And in those phone calls, it didn't come naturally to me at first, because at first I want to interview you. You might be a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. I don't know. I want to make sure I'm interviewing you. But I realized quickly that's a mistake, because they might not want to work here. They don't know who I am. They don't know what we do. So that first phone call was always made either by me or by my partner, and we would pitch. We would just sell you. We would pretend this is an interview, but you would barely say any word unless you have questions, because we would just pitch you until you're excited. Then we wanted to make sure that you meet the entire company. It's a lot easier when it's 2 to 4 people. But it was important to us, even if you were not meeting other engineers and you were meeting operation people, because we were spending more time together than we were with our own family or friends or spouse or whoever you care for. So it mattered for us that people connected, that people believed in what we were doing and could work together. You don't have to be best friends, but you have to get along. And obviously, we still interview for skills and culture, but if you want to go to today, today we're a lot more organized. We create what we call a job description. It's pretty self-explained. Obviously, we don't create them for roles that are constant, and we always have those just for new roles. We're fancy. We post them on all of our social media. And but the most important thing that we did today, that we cared about back then, is we want to create an amazing experience, whether or not you get the job. Because for us, we wanted to make sure that when you're done with the interview, you're telling all your friends. We didn't have the luxury of having recruiter doing that for us, so we're using candidates as a way to market ourselves. We're going to make sure you're going to learn in our interview process. We're going to make sure you're going to have fun and you're going to be passionate and want to be here. In order to do that, we create a very consistent experience. For every role, we create a set of questions, and we train the interviewer to have answers they expect. This will remove bias. This will make sure that we are judging all candidates equally, and we all understand what looks great and what we want to look for. Then we regroup and we talk through it. What do you do at Amazon?
Oh, well, we do something that maybe some people have heard of, the Amazon Loop. So a lot of the stuff prior to the Loop is very similar to what Jonathan described, right? The sourcing, the recruiting, kind of the calls and earning trust of the candidate. The Loop is a little bit different the way that we do it at Amazon. So the Loop is named because you're going to go through 5 to 6 people in the course of a day with a 1 hour interview for each of those people. And the purpose of it is to evaluate 2 things. One of which is to say, are you Amazonian, right? Do you meet the culture, and we'll talk more about the culture in a little bit, of Amazon, and do you have the skill set to do the role, right? So when you're thinking about this loop, that's what every interviewer is talking about and thinking about when they're talking to the candidate. There's 2 people that make a decision, right? They kind of have to have that done. One is the hiring manager, and one is a role of what we call a bar raiser. So I'm a bar raiser at Amazon, as I mentioned. My job is to make sure that this candidate is better than 50% of the people in that role, in that job family. They have to constantly be raising that bar. And I want to look to see whether this person has long-term growth potential within the company. And I'm going to focus not just on one or two of our leadership principles, which we'll get to in a bit, but kind of holistically, is this person going to fit? The hiring manager's role is going to be primarily to look and see, does this person have the skill set to do the job? Right? Do they have the functional skills to do the role? Interesting note about the way that we do things at Amazon is that it's anonymous when you actually do these interviews and you write your feedback and you decide whether you're inclined or not. Then you submit your feedback before seeing what anyone else has to say. So it removes that bias part, which like Jonathan was mentioning. The other thing that's interesting about this is that I, as a bar raiser, have what we call veto power, which maybe some of you have heard about, meaning if we go through an interview and the hiring manager really likes this person, but the data doesn't support it, and they're pushing maybe a little bit too hard, I have the ability to say, like, we will not hire this person. And that's that, right? So we can figure out what to do from that point. So the whole purpose of it is to remove bias from the process, to make sure that we're not grouping together and influencing each other and, oh, yeah, do we like this person, do we not like this person, to make it as clean and fair for the candidate as possible. So that's really the goal of what we're doing. So when we think about hiring then, Jonathan?
So to wrap up hiring, hire for the stage of your company's at, be thoughtful, leverage mechanism, so that you can deliver a great experience to your I said customer, but I really mean candidate. And always be looking for the talents, for that special talent. We're all facing difficult time right now, and so maybe having hiring freeze and so on. But that hiring machine is a slow one to get started. It's not like there's a cold start. So you want to keep it warm. You want to make sure that when that rock star that has no ego is at your door, you can hire them. Or when time comes back and things are fine again, the machines hasn't stopped. You're still trained. Your people knows how to interview, and you can hit the ground running.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll add to that too, from a in kind of recognition of the environment that we're in, right? We hear the news, we see what's going on. So there are a lot of really talented people out there, and you may not be able to hire them today, but we think that we'll be able to do it in the future. Build those pipelines. Build the pipelines that you need, network, hire for all the candidates that you're interested in right now, so that when the gates do open, you can start interviewing as opposed to start looking for people. So that's kind of a little helpful thing there. So we've talked about what to think about before hiring. We've talked about what to do when you're actually hiring and how to interview to remove the risk from candidates that you're bringing in. So let's talk a little bit about the culture, right? And talk about what is the culture that you're thinking about for your business, and what do you want to do? What do you want to build? So when you think about culture, so we say at Amazon, you can write this company culture down, but you're not going to create it, right? You're not going to have a culture in your company and say, oh, I'm going to change it and make it a different culture. The culture is going to be created with every hire that you make, every decision that you make, and over time, right? So you have to be very thoughtful, very deliberate about what you're doing. And kind of back to our recurring theme, one of the things that will help you the most with the culture when you're thinking about building a great team is?
Diversity and inclusion. We're back. This is maybe my favorite fact, though. Diverse team make decision 60% faster. And a lot of you have been at startups. Speed is the name of the game, in my opinion. It matters more than anything. And if you can get 60% faster, I would do this every day. We do this every day, yeah. I should say.
So another little tip here, more diversity and inclusion. So when you think about the companies that are diverse, they're 15% more likely to have higher returns for gender diversity and 35% more for racial and ethnic diversity. This is huge, right? If you think about this up front, when you're hiring, when you're thinking about all the things that you need to do and you're trying to build that company and build that team that is going to be great, these are the things that you need to think about up front while you're doing it, not after the fact, if you can. Okay? So Amazon, we have a culture, but I'd really like to hear about kind of Jonathan's culture at Transfix first. So
Yeah. Before I go into our pillars, like we have this process where every other year, sometime every year, we'll look into ourselves, like look at who we are, look at who we want to be, and put it on paper. Because we didn't build the culture just today, and it evolves. It evolves with every hire we make. It evolves with every decisions and how we act. And so, the latest round came up with those 7 that I'm really passionate about. And obviously, putting my money where my mouth is, like inclusion's number 1. We care about who we are. We care that we're different, and we like talk about it. We're very open through it. Excellence, because we don't settle for anything else. That's what we want to deliver our customer. Not perfection, because that's the enemy of done, but excellence. We're going to deliver an excellence experience to candidate. We're going to deliver an excellent product to a customer. We're going to do it with integrity. I want to look at my kids, and I want to make sure that they know that I'm a good person, and I want to believe that myself. And I want everybody to know this, to feel that at Transfix that we have integrity. We don't make decisions that that we're going to regret. Fun, because we take what we do seriously, but not ourselves. We work more than we do anything else. We might as well have some fun doing it. Boldness, because we take risk. We're all here to take risk. If you don't take a risk, you're not going to invent. You're not going to break the boundaries that you need to perform. And we're going to be agile about it, because when you take risk, you're going to make mistakes, and you need to move. You need to move fast. You need to turn around. Like if you've made a mistake, that's fine, but you need to be cognizant of that and be able to move. And finally, tenacity, because we refuse to take no for an answer. It doesn't matter if it's a candidate that said no, we're going to pitch them again. We're going to maybe like pass this time, but we're going to go back to them. If it's a customer that said no, we'll go back to them too. We don't take no for an answer. And that's who we are. What did you guys?
Yeah, so Amazon leadership principles. So these are the definition of our culture. Most people have probably heard about Amazon, the culture we have. The culture is very strong. It's in our DNA. Before I started working at Amazon, I read books and I heard stories, they talk about these leadership principles a lot. It's like in every conversation, every decision they make, and I was like, really? That sounds odd. What a strange place to be. And then I came and worked at Amazon, and I discovered it's actually true. So these are the things that we actually think about, and every decision we make is determined by these leadership principles. When we think about what's best for the customer, what should we do? What's the customer want to do? What's important to the customer? What do I think about, earning trust? Well, I need to earn trust with my team, right? I need to earn trust with my customers. So these are the things that guide us, right? And there's a lot of them. There's 16 of these leadership principles. So there's some interesting stuff here too. So I'm kind of curious, Jonathan, do you see anything strange there?
Something's a little weird. Some of them don't go together or even contradict each other, right? Like bias for action versus dive deep. How can you do both?
Yeah, so this is actually a great question, right? And something that we deliberately built into these leadership principles is this tension, right? So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to have a bias reaction and just go do stuff, right? That would not work out great, I think, in some cases. So you have to think about these things a little bit. There's another thing we call a mechanism, by the way, which is a one-way versus a two-way door decision. So this is what helps us when you think about, like, should I dive deep or should I move fast? Well, if it's a one-way door and you make a decision and you go through that and there's no coming back, you should probably dive deep. You should think a little bit about what you're doing before you go and make that decision. If it's something that's reversible, you can do it and there's relatively no penalty to do so and you can come back, just move. Bias for action. Thinking about that, right? And again, bias for action is another great example where you think, okay, I can't just say I'm doing things quickly and I do things wrong, right? So we have another leadership principle, are right a lot. Can't just do things wrong a lot, right? That wouldn't make sense from a business perspective. So there's this balance in these things that are kind of built into all of our leadership principles, and that's deliberate, right? Because it's part of how we think, part of how we make decisions, and a fundamental part of our business. It's so fundamental, in fact, that we have this little guy here. I showed this to Jonathan for the first time. He had no idea what it was. It cracked him up. This is actually an Amazon mascot called Pecky. If anybody had heard that before, and it means PECI is for peculiar, because peculiar is how our leadership principles and how our culture are. Because it's such an interesting and such a strange way to think about things. But interesting too, I think, to think about the overlap between the leadership principles that Jonathan has at Transfix and what we have at Amazon. There's a lot of commonality here. So as you're thinking about your businesses and your cultures, there's a lot of good stuff to think here and take from it what you will. So thinking about the culture, summarizing here. So you want to prioritize your culture. You want to prioritize diversity, prioritize inclusion when you're thinking about this, doing it quickly. It will have great benefits for you downstream. You want to define and document your culture, right? So that new people coming in will see, like, this is the culture that we have. When you're sharing it with employees or others, this is what we do. This is how we think about ourselves, right? So Jonathan has that at Transfix. We have that at Amazon as well. Don't be afraid to hire different. So a lot of people that I've worked with, and myself at some point too, you have this affinity bias. You look for people that are like you. So don't do that, right? You may find somebody who's great that's like you, okay, but don't be afraid to hire different. The difference is what's going to bring the uniqueness to your team, the different perspectives that are going to bring decision-making and other ideas that are going to bring that great value to your team from the statistics that we've seen. So don't be afraid to hire different. So we've talked about hiring, we've talked about the culture, now we're going to talk about performance, right? So if you don't have a team that's performing, how can you deliver? So you get this wonderful culture and you've got this, done all this hiring, but boy, they're not actually doing their jobs, or you're not able to deliver the way that you wanted to or said you could. I asked the questions at the very beginning. A lot of hands went up here, so a lot of that's probably related to performance, whether it's intentional or not, probably not, of course, but those are the things that we want to think about and try to figure out how to improve and make sure that we're performing to deliver. So we're going to kick it off with Jonathan. Tell us a little bit about how you manage performance at Transfix.
Yeah, for us, performance is a lot about communication, right? So we set up a framework, or as Brian called them, mechanism, to create a safe space in an environment where managers and employees talk very often about this. Performance should not be a surprise. Good or bad, it should not be a surprise. So for that, we practice radical candor at a very high level. What it means is we're not mean or disrespectful, but we're honest, and we call things out. When things don't work out, we tell you why, and we tell you what we believe needs to change. We set goal and we measure. That's really important. It's very easy to just pass, an engineer just write codes, and so how do you put goals on it? But you can't. You should. You have to. Otherwise, how is the employee going to know they're doing well, and how are you going to know that they're doing well? Deliver on deadlines or communicate, and that deliver on deadlines or reach a goal, or for all of you who write code, if you're starting a project, after that first line, you're not making that deadline. You don't need to wait 2 weeks to tell people. Nothing makes me more furious when I'm learning that somebody is missing a deadline a day after the deadline. Why not 2 weeks ago? So we could talk about it. So if the project matters, we put more resource behind it. If it can be a week late, then so be it. Things happen. That's fine. We can talk through it. That will not happen if you do not think about creating that safe space for those conversations to happen. So to us, again, performance is about communication. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, so performance in Amazon. So we are, I think, probably a known performance-based culture, right? That's how Amazon works. And we use 2 leadership principles primarily to drive this performance when we think about it. So there's insisting on highest standards. So the quality of the work that we do, leaders at Amazon, everyone is hired to be a leader, by the way. So we're known for having what are probably considered to be unreasonably high standards. So the work that we do, that could be narratives, it could be in customer interactions, it's supposed to be very, very high standard. That's what we hold to. And then we think about the hiring and developing the best, right? Well, we talked about the hiring, how to make sure we're bringing these people that are always raising this bar, right, that we talked about. How do I make sure that when I'm developing team members, I'm developing them according to what I think they should be doing and giving them the greatest opportunities I can. So taking those 2 leadership principles now, thinking about what we call the Amazon bar, which means that if somebody's performing at the bar, they're performing as I would expect them to, right, for that particular role or that particular level. Well, how do I know what that is? So Again, we're a little bit larger company, so we have these kind of different mechanisms for doing this, but the mechanism we use is a role leveling guideline. So for every role within Amazon, we have a role leveling guideline that tells you, this is what we expect people to do at this level. It's not, I would say, letter for letter what you're supposed to be doing. There's some ambiguity to it because we want people to be flexible with what they do, but it's supposed to help us calibrate, right? And so we're thinking about who we're hiring, who we're developing, whether somebody's actually performing or not. We're going to be looking at what do we expect this person to do at this particular level, and that role leveling guideline will help us. To figure out whether they're actually doing this according to the role leveling guidelines, we need to gather some data. So that data gathering can be from the goals and the metrics that you have, so those are always really great KPIs to look for. We also have anecdotal data. Anecdotal data is still data. If you're having conversations with people, what do they say? This isn't a witch hunt. You're not looking for people to find reasons to ding them or something like that, but how are they doing wonderful? We want to celebrate what they're doing well, right? Where do they need some growth, right? Because I want to help coach this person. I want to help them make sure that they're doing what they can do and reaching their potential. So that's all of the thing that we're doing around the performance conversation. So a note around the performance conversations, I think for Amazon, performance evaluation is supposed to be dispassionate, right? Are they performing or are they not performing? It's just a question, it's a set of facts. The conversations that you have with the employee should be very empathetic. These are people, right? And so if you're having a performance conversation and somebody needs to work or sometimes he's not doing well, this is a human being. We need to be human beings about that conversation and make sure that we're having it in a very compassionate way. Again, it's not a personal thing. It's just here's what the data tells us. Here's what we need to work on. So that's kind of how we try to think about things.
So to summarize performance, create that safe space of communication so that you can have those conversations. Practice listening to capture data, because the anecdotal data that Brian just talked about is really important. That's how you're going to help guide employees from tough situations. And one we haven't talked about yet, but manage low performer to retain your high performer. Because when you're keeping the low performer around, you're actually just sending a message to the high performer, then the bar that Brian talks about is actually way lower than you think it is, or that you want it to be. And no high performer wants to be at a company that is not high performing. At least I haven't met any. So those are difficult conversations to have, but you should have them.
Yep. So thinking about that now, so we've talked about hiring, we've talked about culture, we've talked a little bit about performance. How do you retain these folks? So, well, you've done all this work, you've built this great team. If they're all headed out the door, this isn't going to be good for your business either, right? That's not going to help you deliver. So when you think about what you're trying to do to retain your employees, there's another very important dimension, which we've talked about already, which is?
We're back, diversity and inclusion. I'm sure now you guys are expecting it. New employees are 42% more likely to stay if they see that you care about inclusion. And again, it's really a great stat. You should do it.
Yeah, that's right. So it's very important for that. There's another great data point here too, right? Which is to say that if any of your employees see bias in the environment in which they work, they're 3 times more likely to think about leaving within a year.
And you wouldn't blame them.
Yeah, why would you blame them, right? So, and you think about all of the benefits that this diversity brings, man, you should really think about that. So very key to retention. So I'm interested to hear from Jonathan here from a Transfix's perspective, like how did you guys think about retention and what did you do?
We think about it every day. This is something that we fundamentally believe is the most important thing we can do. Keep our people and make sure they perform. So first, because we go back to our hiring principle of looking for self-driven people, we're looking for customer-driven people. And so the last thing you want to do is leash them, I guess. But you want to empower them. You want to empower them to make decisions. You want to empower them to make mistakes. You want to empower them to move, and you want to make sure that they understand their purpose. It doesn't matter whether they change the color of a button or they are building a big feature. They should know why it matters. They should know why this launch date matters. They should know. And this doesn't come naturally to me because when I typically focus on the problem or what can get fixed, but celebrate those wins. When you create the right purpose for a feature and their employee on it makes the right decision, is empowered to do it and do so, and to celebrate it. Celebrate the small win, celebrate the big win. It's important to just celebrate. It creates that camaraderie. And finally, in the same way that tough performance conversation shouldn't be surprises, neither should good conversation. You should very much talk about career development. What will it take to that next steps? High performer really care about understanding what it takes to go to the next step. Set up mentors or tell them how they can be mentors. Leadership programs, those are all things that you want to make sure you have set up early and that everybody understands it is very clear.
Yeah. So thinking about keeping top talent at Amazon, right? So, well, a great culture is a great start, right? You want to have a culture where people want to work there. They're proud to be where they're at. They feel like it fits them, right? That's the key to having a good culture. They feel like it's something that they can kind of buy into and it makes sense for them. One of the things that actually Jonathan said, which we do as well, is the career opportunities. In fact, there's a mechanism, kind of a theme here, called career choice within Amazon. So Amazon's huge, right? It's an enormous company. Internally, we kind of call it a candy store, right? Because there's so many positions, there's so many places that you could go to do different things, right? And we want our employees to make those choices. We want them to go do those things. If I have an employee on my team who comes to me and says, Brian, I'm not really that passionate about what I'm doing, I'd like to go do something else, I'm gonna be like, awesome, how can I help, right? They could do that on day 2, and I'm still gonna say that same thing. Because having somebody on my team who's not passionate about it and wants to do something else is just not a great fit. I want them to go be passionate. I want them to go be that passionate person on someone else's team, and let me find somebody on my team who is going to be that passionate person. So we want employees to have this choice. We embrace it, and we kind of really help people find those other roles. The other thing that we really focus on at Amazon is from a motivation perspective, like what motivates people? What motivates all of these really bright people to stay and do what they're doing? You know, they're incredibly bright. They can go do other things. We want to keep them here. We need to keep them motivated. So one of the things that Amazon does, and part of its leadership principles that we hire for, is we hire leaders. Everybody that comes into Amazon is hired to be a leader, which kind of means, if you think about it, we want to treat people like adults. We want to treat them with responsibilities and ask them to perform according to those responsibilities. Sometimes you may find that you can't do that, right? This is life as well, but that's not what we're looking for here. We want to treat people like adults. We want them to become experts with the technology, the people they interact with, the teams, the expertise they develop. For really smart people to get really good at something, if they're really fired up about machine learning, for example, well, let's give them those opportunities. That's our job as leaders, to give them the opportunities to go do those things and become really good at it, because that's how they're going to stay and be excited about what they do. We also don't want to put things in their way. I talked a little bit about day 1 behavior, right? Well, day 2 is kind of the administrative stuff. It's what we call at Amazon death by proxy, where you're doing things because the process tells you to and you don't even know why anymore. So we don't want to put those things in place for our employees. We really fight this, right? Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're a little less successful, just being honest. But that's the goal, right? We don't want to do this, and so we want to remove those barriers because that will help our employees stay motivated. So we kind of encapsulate this all, or I personally encapsulate this all into basically we're pursuing autonomy, mastery, and purpose for our employees, giving them that ability to go do those things. Another thing that actually is very compelling for employees from a motivation perspective and a retaining perspective is working with cool stuff, right? Working with cool technologies, like AWS, for example. People like to do this. It's fun. It's a growth industry. There's pretty cool things. You're all at this conference to kind of learn about this cool technology. That's because the people want to do this, and it's interesting stuff. So at the beginning of the talk, we talked and mentioned a little bit about this is kind of a game, right? It's a high stakes game where you have slim chance of success. And if you're in a game, maybe you would want to have something like this.
Slow.
Cheat code, right? So if you were to think about Amazon being a cheat code, right, helping your business be successful, well, there's some really good data to show this. So maybe we can turn to Jonathan as an example of how AWS helped you.
Yeah, so we're based on AWS since day 1. I started the company on a tiny Elastic Beanstalk instance. But obviously now we've grew and we've many Kubernetes cluster. But one thing that we do a lot is develop different models and different machine learning models. And a few years ago, we tried to do that ourselves, maintaining those models, training them, testing the features that goes in there. That was very, very labor intensive, not just for the data scientists, but they needed to be paired with an engineer and a DevOps engineer, which was very costly and made our data scientists wonder, should I try this new feature? Not worth it. I got to talk to too many people to make it happen. And that's where we see the empowerment just fleeting away. Then came SageMaker, and now I'm pretty sure we were trying to launch 3 during this talk, so I'll check afterwards, but one data scientist can just go all out and have fun with it. While they have fun, they deliver value to customer, which is all everybody cares about at the end of the day. So we've empowered our data scientist team to be self-sufficient, to be empowered, while delivering for a customer. So cool. That's our story.
And I'll share an example of a story from before I came to Amazon. I worked at a company called Human Longevity and built in 2014, 2015 what was at the time the largest whole genome sequencing center in the world, right? The team that I had hired and built to do this, it took them about 6 months to get to the point where they were able to run a production pipeline on AWS. Now, you can deploy that same infrastructure and run the same kind of stuff in about 3 days, right? Which is just astounding to me. So Amazon has this concept that we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. It's what we don't want our customers to be doing, that we should be doing. So when you think about that genomics pipeline, what was, maybe you call it special sauce, or you call it like that was the thing that was unique and novel for us at the time, is no longer unique and novel. And now actually we've got some interesting announcements here at reInvent about omics. Right? So these are really cool things where Amazon's seeing this need, listening to customers, and developing these tools to help out. Amazon is a hard place to come work, right? It's a hard thing to get through. We talked about that interview process. It's actually tough to go through that loop and to get in. So for us as technologists, my team, we were like, the thought of getting into Amazon was actually kind of cool, right? And so we were excited to do this. So out of the team that I built at Human Longevity, out of 25 engineers, 11 of them work here today at Amazon, which is pretty cool, right? I think that they're working on their careers, they're doing fun stuff, so we consider that, and I consider that to be a success. So wrapping this up.
So enable the pursuit of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I really believe that making sure everybody understands their purpose matters. Have regular career conversation so it doesn't become a surprise. And finally, don't micromanage your high performer. I'm sure there's a lot of a lot of high performer in this room, and you hate to be micromanaged. So don't do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're running a little bit low on time. So to kind of summarize the things that we've talked about here. So we talked about hiring, culture, performance, and retention, right? When you think about hiring, make sure you're thinking about what you're doing before you start hiring so that you're hiring the right people to reduce the risk of producing the wrong thing for your customer, right? So think about those things first. When you're hiring, come up with a process. It could be something from Amazon, it could be something from Jonathan's team, it could be your own thing, but come up with something that reduces the risk and make sure you're hiring the right people for what you're doing, okay? So interview process or something like that. Culture. Diversity inclusion, up front and center, thinking about how that will benefit your business downstream is going to be critical to the success of your business. So thinking about culture, what kind of culture do you want to have? You're going to build it with every decision and every hire that you make. So you're not going to be able to change it easily later, so think about it up front when you're doing this. Performance, make sure you're thinking about how to keep the team motivated, how to keep them fired up and working at a high level. Thinking about in Amazon, we think about insisting on highest standards. We're thinking about how to hire and develop the best. So that's how we're thinking about performance and making sure that we're really focused on what makes a great team, using our role leveling guidelines, using the bar, integrating it with the hiring, integrating it with the culture, thinking about this all together. And then lastly, thinking about retention. Right? None of this will work. None of this is going to work for any of us if we can't keep these great people here to do this great work. So what we're trying to do is we want to make sure that we're retaining that top talent. So retaining that top talent is going to be about the culture, right? Diversity and inclusion again. And it's going to be about motivating them and making sure they're doing really interesting stuff and giving them cool things to play with, like Amazon, for example. Anything else you want to add, Jonathan?
We've told you what worked for Transfix, what worked for Amazon. Those things probably won't work for you, right? Like all we hope that we've done is give you some tips and some tools, but most importantly, the message that we want to deliver is just be thoughtful. Just be thoughtful about how you're going to create these experiences for your team.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, last slide. Great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team. So that's what we're trying to build here. We hope that we've helped you think about some of these things and build a great team. We're going to be around for a little bit to answer any questions, but thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming in here.